6 months ago, Hurricane Helene made landfall in Florida and then moved up through Georgia as a strong hurricane before it finally lost some of its strength. But that storm left a huge impact on us here in Georgia. I'm Chief Meteorologist Chris Holcomb from 11 Alive. Joining me is Ben Jones, the Chief Meteorologist at our Technis station in Macon, WMAZ. Ben, we go way back. Thank you so much for joining us tonight as we talk about Helene moving through our area. And you've been in Macon how long now?
Well, I'm from here, but I've been at the station here now going on 28 years. So seen a few storms. Yeah, this one kind of ranks up there.
It really does. And you know, as we were watching this storm develop, it first started developing down in the Caribbean and then moved up into the Gulf of Mexico and really started strengthening here in the Gulf of Mexico before it made that landfall. And as meteorologists, you and I are watching this thing and knowing that once it gets into that warm water of the Gulf of Mexico, that it was going to be strengthening even more. And really the trajectory of this storm is kind of like our nightmare here in Georgia. The storms, the hurricanes that impact us the most are the ones that develop in the Gulf of Mexico, go through the Florida Panhandle, and then just drive up through Georgia. And Ben, that's exactly what this storm did.
Yeah, and there was really nothing in its way either. And I'm with you. I mean, we follow these things when they're in the Southern Gulf coming in. And you still know that even as strong as that storm may be at that point, it's just bathwater out there. And so it's just an explosion potentially there. And that's exactly what we saw with that. And then it was just watching and waiting. It was just a straight line coming on in. And sometimes you're waiting for a steering current or something to kind of push it one way or the other. This thing had eyes on us the whole way.
I mean, it's literally like you can stand with 1 foot in it and 1 foot out of it on that west side. It's just a sharp cutoff. It's just like hurricane rain, nothing, just like that. And then on this side, everything's just nasty over here. You get all this stuff coming in from the Gulf and the Atlantic and all these feeder bands with tornado warnings that can go way on out into the Carolinas. You can see all the way around, all this red out here goes into the Carolinas, and that is a tropical storm warning. So it's at least hurricane force winds, and once it gets up above that, then tropical storm force winds and on the outside edge. But because the core of it's coming right through here is the reason that we have that. As the National Weather Service says, actually they are seeing wind gusts higher than what these observation stations are showing.
I want to show folks at home some of the statistics that we have here about Helene, and take a look at this, and you can see what we're talking about. With this storm made landfall as a Category 4 hurricane with max winds of 140 miles an hour. And then as it moved into Georgia, because it was moving so quickly, it held on to a lot of that strength for a long period. In fact, Ben, it stayed at hurricane strength just to the east of you guys in Macon, then continued up through northeast Georgia. The max wind gusts in the state of Georgia were around 100 miles an hour. Unfortunately, we had 249 deaths in the United States. That was the deadliest hurricane since Katrina back in 2005. 28 deaths here in Georgia directly related to the hurricane, and we had $5.5 billion of losses in timber and in agricultural losses as well. We had flooding here in metro Atlanta, tornadoes in parts of East Georgia. That storm was definitely one to remember. Now, I mentioned here the flooding that we had here in metro Atlanta. Ben, that was mainly from a predecessor rain event because we had a lot of rain here in Atlanta before the storm even moved in. And then adding in on all of that rain, it made it a lot worse, where we had some water rescues here in the metro Atlanta area as well. And Ben, as that storm was coming through the Macon area, and we were tracking that moving through the state of Georgia, what were you guys bracing for there? You were bracing for the worst, right?
Well, absolutely, because coming in hot off the Gulf for us, we're going to get the strongest thing coming in being farther south, and it was all a game of inches. And I can remember even the Weather Service said, pay attention to the track, try to keep, don't get that definite line, don't just follow the one line, but follow the cone.
We're moving north-northeast at 24. Still at 140 mile per hour winds. It is on shore now. Look at that. I thought I was noticing that. There is a jog to the right, to the east right here. Now these things will wobble. This is a historic track. Notice how it took a jog east and then back north. But that is a serious turn right there. So we'll see if it straightens up. You'll see hurricanes do this. It's the wobble, and it'll go, if you go back and look at any a historic line of any landfalling tropical system, and you'll see all kinds of weird, snaky things like this. It's not a straight route all the time. But I am interested to see if that does anything or if it does straighten itself back up.
For that cone of uncertainty, it could go farther west this way, east this way. It turned out that that line was very important, though. It was a case of the haves or have-nots, and there was an immediate shutoff from extreme hurricane force winds to nearly nothing on the west side.
I mean, it's literally like you can stand with 1 foot in it and 1 foot out of it on that west side. It's just a sharp cutoff. It's just like hurricane rain, nothing, just like that. And then on this side, everything's just nasty over here. You get all the stuff coming in from the Gulf and the Atlantic and all these feeder bands with tornado warnings that can go way on out into the Carolinas.
So when this came into our southeastern counties, not only were we looking at wind gusts potentially around 100 miles an hour, but you had the forward movement of the storm, which just kind of coupled into that and added just the motion of the storm with those winds. And I just remember when it was coming in, you know, there's observational data. You have plot data out there that's going to show you what the wind speeds are in different little towns and locations. And it didn't take long. We started losing these sensors, for a better word, and we were kind of flying blind out there. There was no way of really clocking what the wind was doing. And I can remember at one point the weather team looking at each other and saying, we're not exactly sure what the wind speed is out there. And then what it took was an EMA director call, I believe it was from Johnson County, that came in verifying 100-mile-an-hour winds on the ground. The only thing I knew to do then was go over to velocity mode. So we were literally having to go the way we would do a tornado.
That in here, and as we see when we're looking at some of this stuff with the velocity map, we're seeing numbers that are pegging out with some of the numbers they were talking about, 90 to 100, something like that, and just have to figure out what that translates down to, mix that down to the surface, and maybe some of those numbers are right then. All this blue here looks to be where we're really seeing things still flare up right at what's left of the core. So showing, 81, 78, 93, 87 there. Just in this spot, which again, unfortunately, is kind of in the area where we have no readings.
It's checking the velocity, picking up the speed of these raindrops and everything that's coming through the atmosphere as it moves up. And we were noticing 100-mile-per-hour gusts easily. I'm not sure how much of that was actually down on the surface, but there was obviously a lot of wind gusts that were close to that. But once you get from, I would say, our eastern counties, anywhere from Hancock, Baldwin, Johnson County, Telfair, Wheeler, Trutland, that was hard hit. And to the east, as you mentioned, toward Augusta and South Carolina, you go just, a matter of a couple of miles to the west, and it's a totally different event. So it really was a textbook showing of the dirty side of a hurricane versus the clean side. And it is a night and day difference. And if you go back and look at any of the power outage maps or damage maps or wind maps, they all follow that line. So it was scary because the original track was that it was going to go a little farther west toward kind of between Macon and Columbus, which would have put our entire area right in the bullseye. But it did track a little bit farther east and graze some of our eastern counties. So in our sense, we don't wish it on anyone, but in our area, we dodged a bullet. It could have been a much bigger event for our entire area, but it was mainly to the east.
And Ben, here is that track of the historical data here that we have in from the National Hurricane Center. And we'll zoom in first as it was moving through the Gulf of Mexico, making landfall there near Perry, Florida. And again, this was at around 11 o'clock at night on the 26th there of September. And then it moved inland, coming up through the state of Georgia, generally on the 27th through the overnight hours. And you can see Atlanta and Macon there on the map. And then look just to the right, that is the track of the storm. And Ben, you mentioned here that a lot of those tracks that we were watching earlier were bringing the center of that track, as you mentioned, between Macon and Columbus, and then sometimes it might shift a little closer to Macon. At one point, we were thinking that track would be coming through the Atlanta area. But here you see what actually happened going to the east. And again, that is the important part between the dirty side of the storm, which is generally on the right-hand side of the track. And that's what gave Augusta the worst conditions. Not only did they see those hurricane force and tropical storm force wind gusts, but they also had tornadoes on the right-hand side of the track. But yet here we are, Ben, in Atlanta and Macon on that west side. And yes, we had some impacts here, but just not as bad as what they had over on the east side.
Well, and I always think about too on that dirty side of the storm when like when you and I are trying to explain that on air, what does dirty side mean? And it quite literally means all impacts. I mean, totally clean usually on that other side, and it's really always dramatic, that drop off shift from one side to the other. Case in point, when Katrina came through all those years ago, the storm is coming up through New Orleans, but the outer bands had a tornado that came through our area in Fort Valley, leveled the bank at the same time that hurricane was so many miles away. And then for it to be on a micro scale, so much closer to where we could actually really see that kind of delineation between what is just incredible wind to not much at all on the other side. These tropical systems are amazing to watch, to see how just it is literally the haves and have-nots. And unfortunately, the eastern half of Georgia, that was the haves. There was a ton of wind, as you know, and the rain was a big problem. So it still amazes me, even up into western North Carolina, that it was still able to carry the problems that it had that far up. I don't recall seeing that.
Yeah, and we'll follow that track here as we zoom in a little bit tighter here. You'll see that track that did go through their northeast Georgia and into western North Carolina, looped up into parts of Tennessee, into Kentucky, and then came back around before dying out almost near the Nashville area. So it really did impact a lot of people here in the southeast as the storm was moving through. So Ben, as you were tracking this storm, we talked about it, forecasting it moving in, and then watching it move in as well during the storm. What were your fears as a meteorologist here as we were tracking that and you're trying to give that information to your viewers? I was trying to give that information to our viewers. What were your fears that we were going to see with this storm?
Well, because of the sheer size and scope of this, if it's a tornado warning, then you're on a smaller scale. You think about, okay, the folks in this area are going to have power outages in kind of a micro scale. With this kind of a wind field, if it had come through the core of Macon and the core of Atlanta like that, you're talking, what they saw in the eastern half of Georgia, just power outages on such a massive scale that we always tell, and I know you do too, tell the viewers to have multiple ways of keeping up with what's going on. In the technological age we're in now, you have all kinds of devices, keep them charged up, keep a way that you can keep a sense of what's going on. And my fear was that there's just still a lot of folks that don't have that, or maybe just forgot and didn't charge those up. And how frightening that would be to be in that moment in the middle of the night like that and not knowing, is this the worst? Is this just the beginning? Does it get worse than this? So when it's on that scale, it's like what we here refer to as an all skate. Everybody's involved. So you really don't know exactly what all's coming. You know what the potential is, but there's just so many people involved at one time. So don't like that.
And as we were tracking the storm here in Atlanta and we started seeing that shift a little bit more to the east, we still couldn't breathe a sigh of relief because, as I mentioned, we had the predecessor rain event with days of rain before the hurricane even got here. And so our focus then became the potential for flooding, which we did have. We had more than 200 homes in the metro Atlanta area that had water coming up in them. We had swiftwater rescues here in the Atlanta area near some of the bigger creeks and streams that we were dealing with. So we did have that here. And then Ben, in Macon, even though that track was to the east, y'all still had impacts in the city, right?
Oh yeah, I mean there was some smaller areas of flooding. One thing that caught my attention now when I think back on it is, again with that, it was mainly obviously a wind event, but that wind coming forward, so on the east side of the storm, so you're looking at like 100-mile-an-hour gusts, and then I can't remember the exact speed of the storm. Let's say it was 20 miles an hour, 20, 30 miles an hour. And then on that right side, you're actually kind of adding that to it.
Yeah.
So you're looking at an increase in wind speed. And on the other side, if we were looking at 40, 50 mile per hour gusts with the movement, we're actually kind of subtracting the movement of that storm. So it was even less. So we had reporters out in the field stationed in different spots. Dublin was one of those places. And even that far east and southeast of us, it still was not quite on that line yet. I mean, you could almost throw a rock and all of a sudden total devastation through there. And even now, when I go through that area, I'm sure you've been through there as well, either you go down I-16, heading towards Savannah or the coast of Georgia, or even if you take 20 out toward Augusta and all that, that whole area, it's just unbelievable, the trees that are laid down on one continuous swath. And it has a definite beginning and a cutoff point. I mean, that was a swath for sure.
Yeah, and you mentioned there on I-20, we have that exact same scenario on I-20 between here and Augusta. Once you get past Lake Oconee going toward the Augusta area, it is a sharp line there really between two exits. One exit had hardly anything, and the next exit was pretty much devastation there from those storms. So Ben, it is 6 months later, and in a way, to me, this seems like it was a year ago when the storm came through. It was such an impactful storm for our state. How are people in Central Georgia and areas to the east of you? I mean, the agricultural industry, I mentioned $5.5 billion in losses for timber and agriculture here in the state of Georgia. How are your people down in the WMAZ viewing area still dealing with the aftermath of this?
Well, I tell you, I know some farmers personally in this area. A friend of mine, a good friend of mine, is a pecan farmer. Now, most of his farms are in the Macon County, Crawford County area. So that's in our western counties. And there are other ones that I know that you get the same thing. You'll get these phone calls, these texts leading up to it, and you can it's palpable. You can feel there's so much riding on it for these guys. And while his farms were not affected, he knew some of the folks in some of our eastern and southeastern counties, parts of southeast Georgia, total loss. I mean, it's, some of this, it's generations of farming, and they're just done. I mean, they're not coming back. To replant some of these trees, to try to sow even with pecans, I think if I remember right, you're looking at like a 10-year minimum to even get up to something that could yield anything. So you think about how risky of a business that is in those moments, that it's there for 150 years of family and then it's gone like that. But what I've seen, and I see it every time, you see it too, it's just the resilience of the community. We just had stories today on the 6-month look back of these communities pitching in, going back, rebuilding houses, rebuilding porches. They were rebuilding a wheelchair ramp on the back of a house, just community members who's volunteering to do that. So as bad as these storm systems are, it always, always never fails to show the best of us on the backside of that. And like you say, it does feel like a year, and you look back at some of the damage that's still out there and you think, wow, it may be years before they come back from that. But already in 6 months to see how much has happened it's really special to see. So I love seeing it.
And it's good to see that improvement out there. And I remember talking with the folks from the Agriculture Commission, as there are a lot of generational farmers who have had these farms for generations, and you never want to be the generation where the farm ends because of something like this. And they were saying the reality is in parts of southeast Georgia, central Georgia, east Georgia, that this storm would end that generational farmer trend that they had there, that it might end for some families because, as you mentioned, it's not only getting back to normal, it's just what is the new normal going to be now that this storm, we've seen it 6 months, we still have debris in some spots of the state. And it's just going to take a while for us to ever get back to that new normal.
Yeah, and you and I have seen storm damage in different places over the years in different states and all that stuff. I can't, and I'm sure there have been, but as far as me, being a part of it and actually witnessing it, that kind of storm damage, and it when really hit me was on a trip back around Christmas time to the coast and heading down I-16, and just that immediate looking at that on both sides of the interstate. And because, you and I were in the TV, but we're in the studio. We're zoned in on the radar and all that. But when you finally get out there and see what all it did, because it's colors on a map, you're trying to figure out where the numbers are, and you see it firsthand, and it never ceases to be shocking. This was one of the more shocking to me, though, just the sheer volume of how many trees. You just drive for miles and miles. And that's just what you're seeing on the interstate. Like you said, on I-20, we only really get a good shot at it on 16 and 20, but in between all of that, just trees laid over. It's remarkable.
All right, Ben Jones, thank you so much for joining us from WMAZ down in Macon, our Technis station there, giving us your insight of what, number one, what we went through as meteorologists from here in Atlanta to down in Macon, as well as the storm moved through. And, now we're in severe weather season, watching for additional storms. It just seems like it's a never-ending thing with always these potential threats that are moving our way. But we at least get through this season of severe weather. And then here we go, June 1st to November 30th, hurricane season will start again. Let's hope that we don't see another storm like Helene moving through. So Ben, thank you so much for being with us here, and I'm sure that we'll be talking again soon.
All right, Chris, former 13 WMAZ alum. We're proud of you, straight from the heart.
All right.
Talking to you.
Thanks, Ben.
The storm claimed the lives of 6 people in central Georgia. Right when the storm passed, we sent crews out to survey damage across our area, and here's what they found. Power outages, closed roads, trees on top of houses, and debris strewn all over people's yards.
Our southeastern counties were among the hardest hit, from Trutland to Washington County, Telfair, Wheeler, and Lawrence counties. Tonight, Dublin and Lawrence County looks different than it did back in September.
Solane Arif shares more on the work it took to rebuild.
We came to Coney Street to take a look at the damage, one of the first places we saw how bad the hurricane had hit. And these power lines that are in the sky right now, these were actually on the ground.
The same street looking very different 6 months ago. Trees, power lines, leaves, and rain covered Coney Street. This is what it looks like now.
Our neighborhood was not hit as bad as some in town.
Gil Gillis lives on Coney Street, and he's just as thankful today his neighborhood escaped serious damage.
A lot of places around our neighborhood here and in Dublin, it's so barren now because of so many trees that fell and had to be removed. It looks different now.
He says Dublin bounced back so fast, it's almost easy to forget a hurricane came through here.
The city did a really great job, and Georgia Power did a really great job of jumping on the problem.
Dublin at-large City Council member Sarah Colby says it took their staff working overtime and around the clock to get them back to normal.
Well, I would say that we are 90% there. We are seeing measured progress, continued progress to full restoration.
She says some of their biggest missions were maintaining their water supply and clearing debris.
The longer lasting impact of the hurricane is going to be waiting on contractors and roofers to continue their work and insurance companies to continue those repairs.
Half a year later, you can still see Helene's mark in some Dublin neighborhoods, but if you take a look back, you can also see how far it's come. Reporting in Dublin, Solane Arif, 13 WMAZ News.
While Helene took down hundreds of trees countywide, Dublin Mayor Joshua Kite, who took office in 2021, has been working on a new tree initiative. The city says just last Thursday, they planted their 1,000th tree. The landscape tells a story of destruction and resilience. Timber farmers in Trutland County are facing huge challenges with millions of dollars in damages threatening their way of life.
As Hunter King tells us tonight, for these families, forests aren't just trees, they're generational investments and economic lifelines.
It's been 6 months since Hurricane Helene came through this part of Trutland County and destroyed much of the timber here in this area. The smell of pine tar is still strong. This is a good example of the lasting impact that this storm had on this area. Where emerald forests once stood, now lie twisted trunks and broken dreams. Hurricane Helene wasn't just a storm, it was an economic earthquake for timber farmers like John Hutchison. He watched decades of careful cultivation topple in hours.
As a whole, we lost over $100,000 just on our tree farm.
The numbers are staggering. State estimates place statewide timber damage at $1.2 billion. It's a blow that ripples through entire rural communities. For small landowners, each fallen tree represents more than wood. It's lost income, interrupted generational plans, and a landscape forever changed.
These small tree farms, that's what they depend on. And it just got flipped upside down.
Hutchison says salvage efforts have been painfully slow. Wet ground and damaged infrastructure mean much of the fallen timber will simply just rot. Of all of the acres that Hutchison owns, only a third could be reached for recovery. The rest, a potential total loss.
We were able to salvage about 40 acres out of 126 acres, more than likely just going to rot.
Government assistance offers a glimmer of hope. Federal programs are working to provide grants, but the process is slow and hasn't been approved yet by the Trump administration. The Forestry Commission now hurries to assist and clean up with increased wildfire risks from the storm's destruction. Reporting in Trutland County, Hunter King, 13 WMAZ News.
John says he's just thankful everyone in his family survived the storm.
The Emergency Forest Restoration Program provides support for affected timber farmers. Applications are currently being processed through federal and state agencies.
We're showing you the recovery efforts in Soperton. Carmen Brown shares how far the town has come since that devastating day in September.
6 months ago, the area behind me was in shambles. It was a completely different picture. Glass was shattered everywhere, power lines were down, and the roof had been ripped apart. Now, a different story is unfolding here in the city of Soperton.
Last October, Mayor John Kuhn called Hurricane Helene's impact, quote, paralyzing. Months later, he says it was a challenge to everyone's spirit, but morale has been high.
And everybody was lifting everybody up, not only with physical and monetary, but also spiritual.
Soperton's inland location made it particularly vulnerable to Helene's destructive power. The city had no power for days and no water for hours as crews worked tirelessly. The farmers' furniture market suffered serious damage, including losing the roof. It's been torn down and cleared for rebuilding.
We're coming back. We're going to build bigger. We're going to build better. And in fact, probably by this time next month, we'll see construction. It'll put a piece of our town, a very important piece of our town, back to where it was.
While infrastructure recovery remains a top priority, Trutland County EMA Director Justin McNewer says they're focused on long-term planning.
We had firemen stationed up here. We had commissioners. We had city council, fire chief, police chief, sheriff. So we was prepared. We was able to respond. But a lot of things have got to change.
The economic impact has been severe for the agricultural community. Soperton, known as the Million Pine City, faces years of recovery.
Devastated, and they won't recover from this for many years. But you know what I found out about those guys? They're resilient just like everybody else is.
Most importantly, Kuhn and McNewer agree teamwork was crucial, which is key for making more progress in the next 6 months. In Soperton, Carmen Brown, 13 WMAZ News.
A Lawrence County group is getting ready to help Hurricane Helene victims in North Carolina.
They'll be restoring a damaged home that housed about 8 disabled people before the hurricane. Officials say Western North Carolina received the most extensive damage from the storm. The state said Helene caused at least $53 billion in damages and recovery needs.
Exactly 6 months later, folks are still picking up the pieces that Helene left behind. As Celine Arif shows us, it is not a distant memory from some folks in central Georgia.
One on this side, one on that side, and you're good to go.
Kenny Rowland is the director of the Lawrence Baptist Association. It's a group of 48 churches that helps folks however they can, like building or restoring homes.
Most of the time it's just we wait on the Lord, but most of the time we look to the hardest hit areas and who's not getting enough relief.
In their own backyard, they spent weeks helping Lawrence County neighbors after the hurricane. And for them, being a good neighbor doesn't stop at state lines. That's why they've helped a Western North Carolina town called Old Fort.
Our association owns a shower trailer. So we hauled our shower trailer up there, and then we went back Thanksgiving, went back Christmas, we went back school break.
Old Fort is a tiny town with a population of less than 1,000, but their county EMA director, William Keller, says they suffered enormous damage.
For 90% of locations in McDowell were without power. There was issues, lack of running water due to no electricity to power the wells.
Keller says Helene killed 2 people in their county, and right after the storm, they had more than 700 emergency calls into their local 911.
The government is coming along and helping cleaning out the creeks and stuff like that, but there's still a lot of people that won't never be back. And some of them just moved away.
Keller says recovery still has a ways to go, but thanks to groups like this one, they're getting there much faster.
Charitable organizations from all over the United States that have continued to support our community, including the town of Old Fort, with volunteer labor, materials, supplies.
Reporting in Lawrence County, Celine Arif, 13 WMAZ News.
About 30 volunteers will join Roland on the trip from April 7th to the 11th, and you don't have to be a member of the Baptist Association to help.
We have more information on how you can get involved with food donations at 13WMAZ.com.